Okay, great. Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Rosie Levine. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. China Education Trust. I'm really delighted to welcome you all to this event. The U.S. China Education Trust is a DC-based nonprofit. We're housed here at the Elliott School at George Washington University. And we advance U.S. China relations through education and exchange. And since 1998, we've held conferences, events, dialogues, closed-door meetings, public events that try to seek to help U.S. understand China better, Chinese understand the United States, and highlight the contributions of Asian Americans to the relationship. I don't see a lot of students here in the audience, but GW students, feel free to come by and get involved with our, I see one. Okay, great. Well, please feel free to get involved. We host a lot of events here on campus and engage with the GW campus community as well. This series is part of an ongoing monthly program from USET called China Connections. The goal is to host experts for discussions on contemporary issues in U.S.-China relations and China's domestic politics, and also inspire the next generation of China specialists to take an interest in China and understand what the ground and what experience in a country can help bring to their career in the future. So with that in mind, we're really delighted to have this panel represented here, each of whom bring enormous amount of expertise themselves, but also contributed to this incredible volume, Chinese Encounters with America, which profiles 12 Chinese individuals whose transformative experiences in the United States have helped to influence China in a range of sectors from diplomacy to dance. So at USET, we're particularly excited about this topic because this was extremely core to our mission. And I really was struck by how this book makes tangible a really abstract notion of what does education exchange actually bring or get or deliver to the United States. And at a time when student visas and restrictions are increasing, I think this really helps to underscore these personal examples of how U.S. and China have a lot in common, a lot of shared priorities, and really runs counter to the prevailing narrative that our interests are fundamentally incompatible. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from the speakers today, and we're delighted to have them. A few housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded, and we'll post it on YouTube, on USET's YouTube page after the event. We'll have about an hour discussion here. Presentations followed by Q&A, followed by a reception afterwards. We hope you'll join us. Our friends from JF Books are in the back. They're selling copies of the book, so please feel free to buy a copy and get it signed if you'd like to, and they'll be here after the event as well. And lastly, we are delighted to co-host this event with the Sigur Center for Asian Studies here at George Washington University. So next up in line to give remarks is Eric Schlissel, the director of that center, and so I'll turn the mic over.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Hi, I'm Eric Schlissel, Director of the Sigur Center for Asian Studies here at GW. Thank you so much, Rosie Levine, to USET for holding these events, which have really enriched the presence of China-related programming here on this campus. We're always very happy to co-sponsor with our friends up here at USET, because fundamentally, I think that the mission that Rosie's described, mission of exchange and education, speaks to the fundamental promise of the university and the promise of humanities and social sciences, which is that no matter how imperfect our efforts may be, through the constant effort to understand one another, we come to a greater understanding of humanity as a whole, and we advance the mission of human knowledge and enlightenment. And that's what we at the Sigur Center try to do. So the Sigur Center is the largest, oldest, and most active center of Asian studies here in the DC area, as one of America's top 10. Since the 1960s, we have informed not only policy, but every field of Asian studies here at our university and for the DC community. And our particular mission these days is to ensure that in the current climate, the current DC environment, there is always a space for nuanced discourse about Asia driven by expertise. And as we also enjoy this commanding view out of Washington, DC, we make sure that a lot of that discourse is policy relevant. So events like these are really close to our hearts. So thank you, Rosie, for being here. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce a voice that'll be familiar to a lot of us who listen to NPR, and that is our moderator, Scott Tong. Scott Tong joined NPR's Here and Now as a co-host in July 2021. Before that, he spent 16 years at Marketplace, another NPR program, as Shanghai bureau chief and senior correspondent. Scott Tong has reported from more than a dozen countries, including Venezuela, Ethiopia, Burma, and Japan. During COVID-19, he reported a series of features on the pandemic and long-term innovation. And at Marketplace, he investigated such varied topics as baby selling in China's international adoption system, slave labor in Chinese brick-making plants. Here in DC, the doctoring of the EPA's science findings on the risk of fracking. He's reporting the 2011 Japan tsunami, the famine of the Horn of Africa, and a topic very close to my heart, as I am an Uyghur and Xinjiang specialist, the economic suppression of Uyghurs and other Muslim groups in Xinjiang. Prior to Marketplace, Scott worked as a producer and reporter for PBS NewsHour, where he joined a team covering post-invasion Iraq in 2003. Scott served as a Knight Wallace Journalism Fellow at the University of Michigan in 2014. We're delighted to have him here as a moderator tonight. Without any further ado, Scott Tong.
Well, thanks so much to the Sigur Center, to U.S China Education Trust. It's a great opportunity to be here. You just talked about kind of experts and expertise, and then you introduced journalists first. So the experts are on this side of the table. I'm here to set the table a little bit and then just get the conversation going. So I'm going to give you one news factoid and one quick story. This is the longest I'm going to talk today. I was just at the Chinese embassy, which said 16, you mentioned the Chinese students and visas, 16, according to the embassy, 16 Chinese national students in August were tried to come into the U.S. with their visas and were repatriated back to China. So some of them, the visas were revoked. Others, they don't understand why, but that's the number that happened last month in August. So quick story that's relevant to the experts to my right here. I think a lot of us maybe are in the room because of connections between the U.S. and China, notably Chinese scholars, talented people coming to the United States. Connects to my own family story, which I'm going to tell really quickly. So my Laojia, my village, is in northern Jiangsu province. And the first out of the village was my great-grandfather, born 1880, as best we can tell. And at the time, he joined a group of Chinese students, university students, who went to kind of one of the most open places at the time to learn about the outside world. He went to Japan. We're told by or couldn't document it, but told by the people in the village that he aced the civil service exam and he went to Japan, studied law at Waseda University, did a lot of things there. Graduated with a law degree and married a Japanese woman, to the great surprise of his Chinese wife back in the village, which is a whole nother conversation. Chinese openness, right, to the outside world is institutional, right? The other quick story is my grandmother on the other side, on my mother's side. So she was born 1905, and at the age of 8, her feet were unbound in Nanjing, and somebody in her family decided, we're going to send you to an American missionary-run school, middle of nowhere, China, Nanchang. You know, kind of go up the river, take a big left, cross a giant lake, and that's Nanchang. You know, not a whole lot happening there. And she chronicled it in letters to her teachers who were there at the time, principally to American teachers from the U.S. East Coast who were there for their own adventures and known opportunities there. And we found all of those letters where she chronicled her life. She always wanted to come to America and study and, you know, finish her university studies. Never made it. But I think the segue to what we're going to talk about is, I think those are a couple individual stories of institutions and bridges and investment in these relationships between China and the United States. And like the people in my family, when the doors were open, they were the opportunists. And then when the political situation changed, they became the traitors. And that's the story. But the interesting part of the history to me is the people who are the straddlers. And that's what this book is about. So let me pause because we're going to have, well, here, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll have, each of you has a 5-minute or so presentation on what you wrote about. Maybe I'll ask each of you to do that. In between, I'll ask you a quick question, and then we'll chat among us. So Terry, first to you. Thank you. Mhm.
I didn't straddled it and I didn't fall down. Stand over here so I can see the slides. Oops. Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, this is the book cover. And anybody recognize this image? Yes. These are Chinese ping pong players arriving at Detroit Airport in April of 1972. Now, the Americans, much to everybody's surprise, had gone to China a year earlier, and even before Nixon went to China. And that's what started all of this. So it all started with sports diplomacy, and it's still so that's certainly one of the underlying themes of the book. This new book is the flip side. It's the counterpart to a book that I wrote a couple of years ago called Americans in China. So these are the stories of Americans who've lived and worked in China and have, so from the Cold War on, tried to understand, from different angles what was going on in China. And by the way, I forgot to mention that Scott's stories and many more are in his book called A Village with My
Oh, thank you. We're talking about your book today.
But your book is so worth reading. It's so full of insight and so poignant and personal. So please take a look at that as well as these two. So give you a quick Chinese encounters with America. We asked three basic questions. Why did Chinese come to the United States? What did they experience in America? And how did they adapt their ideas after they went back? So we're not talking about tourists or immigrants or refugees or dissidents. We're talking about these straddlers, these people who live and operate in both worlds. So the book has three parts. The first is the early Cold War period. And these are people who had experienced encounters with America early on and were punished for that reason. But they went back to China, and particularly during the Cultural Revolution, they suffered a great deal. Ji Xiaozhu was an interpreter and diplomat who came to New York with his family as a boy. He left after his second year at Harvard and went back to China. Became an interpreter in Korea, but more importantly, later was an interpreter to Mao and Zhou Enlai, and even accompanied Deng Xiaoping. Xie Zhida was the first female president of a major Chinese research university. Anybody know her name? You knew her. Yeah. So she studied physics at MIT, and a remarkable story. Yeah. Zheng Yun was an America watcher who was exposed to American education and even to Western music before the Chinese Revolution in 1949, and became an anti-American. America was the enemy during the Korean War, but eventually became really one of China's preeminent specialists who developed a much more nuanced picture of American domestic politics and foreign policy. So part two is really the period of reform and opening and engagement when Chinese had more opportunities to come to the United States after diplomatic relations were established in 1979. Wang Jisi is still active as one of the America watchers and one of the best known America watchers. He spent 7 years during the Cultural Revolution herding sheep in Inner Mongolia. And so he basically learned his English early on from a dictionary. Yeah, remarkable story. Marjorie Yang is the one character that we have from Hong Kong. And it's really a family story like yours, Scott. It's a textile company called Esquel now. But here's a story where you have a collision between business and politics because Esquel, which manufactures a lot of shirts, gets his cotton from Xinjiang, right? And because of the sanctions, the U.S. sanctions, has become very difficult. Zhang Ye and Elizabeth Knup has written about her, so she'll tell you, but Zhang Ye had enormous influence on the development of civil society and women's rights in China. Lang Ping, anybody know the name of Lang Ping? When we started this book, we went to some Chinese colleagues and they said, you must include Lang Ping. Lang Ping was a sports icon. She was a female volleyball player. And what's so interesting about her story is she not only ended up coaching the Chinese volleyball team, but then the American volleyball team at the Beijing Olympics. And so she is truly a straddler. And Yang Meiqi, who Emily Wilcox has written about, was a pioneer in introducing modern dance to southern China, in Guangzhou and Guangdong in the 1980s, right? Yeah. So these are people this is a period of recovery from the Cultural Revolution. These are people who are looking for ways to improve China's situation and to help modernize after the devastation of the Cultural Revolution. So with part 3, it's a bit more contemporary. We have people...
And forgive the 1-minute warning here.
We have people who have more opportunities. The party doesn't dictate all of their jobs. And so Dengxing Wang comes from Hunan. He's a plant biologist who ends up as a chaired professor at Yale. But then in 2014, he goes back to China because it has more opportunities in his profession. Hong Huang was sent to New York in the early 80s with a bunch of Chinese kids to learn about American society. And she was supposed to become a diplomat, an interpreter. And instead, she went to Vassar College and she became a social media influencer. She has millions of followers in China. Ma Tianjie is a young journalist, environmental journalist, who studied in the United States, was very impressed with the American laws on the environment, went back to China, helped to implement some of these changes. But then with the first Trump administration, cooperation on climate change became much, much more difficult. So you have a very different story there. And then finally, Gong Tianpeng, Peng Gong, who also came as a boy to the Juilliard School of Music in New York, was destined to become the next the next virtuoso pianist, and instead became a composer. When he told his parents, I don't want to be a pianist, I want to be a composer, they said, what are you talking about? How can you throw away your life and so forth? How can you get a job? Shanghai Philharmonic Orchestra invited him to be their resident composer, and that's what he's been doing. So finally, Obama, when he visited in 2009 to Shanghai, were you there then, Scott?
I was there.
Okay, maybe you saw him.
From a distance.
Obama said, I believe strongly that cooperation must go Beyond our government, it must be rooted in our people, in the studies we share, the business we do, the knowledge we gain, and even the sports we play.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. Much appreciated. So, Elizabeth, you're next. And as you kind of transition, let me just ask Terry a quick question, just to kind of understand the framing of the book. I mean, you argue that this can serve as an alternative narrative of U.S. and China relations. Just kind of fill out the rest of the sentence so we kind of understand that argument.
Right. It's an alternative to the argument that engagement with China was a failure. For one thing, the idea that Americans knew what was best for China and that they could change China. Well, it turns out that the Chinese actually knew, and the Chinese wanted engagement. And so the whole purpose of the book really is to complicate this idea and to be able to understand and see this from a Chinese perspective.
Yeah, Terry, thank you. Elizabeth, over to you.
So I've known Zhang Ye for a really long time. So this chapter is something that I wrote from some personal knowledge of her and many, many interviews with her. So it's really her voice in the chapter. If you read it, a lot of it is in her voice and her words. And one of the first things that she said to me when I started to talk to her about this project was, this is a small story inside a big story. And what she meant by that was her own personal story, which is what the chapter is about, is really unfolding against the backdrop of a much bigger story. And by this, she meant really China's emergence from the darkness of the Cultural Revolution, China's economic, political, and social reform movement, its emergence and engagement with the rest of the world, and ultimately China's transformation into a global power. But as I worked on the chapter more, and it made it a lot more complicated for me to figure out how to write it, I realized that the big story and the small story also included things like the way in which market-oriented economic reform really upended the role of the individual in society and made individuals independent economic and social actors, which really transformed a lot of the traditional way society was organized. Also, the emergence of concepts of women's rights and female agency and women's ability to make choices and in their own lives are also something that happened during this era, and also the growth of independent civil society. And Zhang Ye and almost everyone outlined in this book, really their lives illustrate these particular trends, particularly in section 2, which Terry has outlined as the reform era. So I'm going to try really quickly to give you some highlights to Zhang Ye's life so that you can maybe understand a little bit about her. Here she is with her family. She was born in Harbin in 1954. She was the third of 4 daughters. Her father was an ardent communist. He joined the Communist Party in the 1930s. He was an educator. And she was self-described tomboy who she says her father raised her as a son because they didn't have any boys in their family. She attributes a lot of her personality traits and her assertiveness and her willingness to take chances, et cetera, to this upbringing. Her father was persecuted in the Cultural Revolution. And 1969, Zhang Ye also went to Inner Mongolia, like Wang Jisi. She was only there for 3 years. I think she was young. She was 14 or 15 years old. She was enthusiastic in the beginning because it seemed like a patriotic thing to do. But I think when she was there for a while, it didn't inspire as much enthusiasm. In 1971, 72, her father gets back to the Beijing Second Foreign Languages School. She finds a way back to Beijing, reunites with her family, goes to college, and learns English. I need to go to the next picture. There she is. So when she graduates from college, there's not that many things you can do with an English degree, but she joins the China International Travel Service and really becomes in the front line of engaging with international people who are coming to China for the first time after China starts to open up. She meets her first Americans in 1976 when the Stanford University board delegation travels to China, accompanied by two young China watchers, Harry Harding and Doug Murray. They're young together with Zhang Ye. They speak Chinese. They build a bond that actually lasts a lifetime. And for her, it's this moment to realize that Americans are not army hat wearing, jack-booted, terrible people, but they're actually human beings with whom she can really relate. In 1979, she gets married. She has one child, a daughter. And in 1980, she leaves CITS and joins the Foreign Affairs Department of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, which had just been established 3 years prior to that. Right around that time, the Ford Foundation is also negotiating its entry into China, and Zhang Ye is a principal actor in that process. In 1984-85, she is, with Ford Foundation support, she goes to Smith College. Her first opportunity, this is her first chance to go to the United States. She spends a year at Smith. She's part of the first group of non-STEM, non-degree students who are going to the United States, right? In the beginning, it was science and degree PhD students who were going to the US. So she's in this sort of next wave. I think she was torn. She wanted to stay in the US, but she'd left her daughter behind. She left her job behind. She really had to come back. So she did come back. And then she gets seconded to the Ford Foundation. She works there for quite a while. She's there through the Tiananmen period. She becomes a really important interlocutor between Americans who are trying to understand just what's going on in China post Tiananmen. The first chief representative of the Ford Foundation, Peter Geithner, doesn't speak Chinese. So really she becomes his eyes and ears, both literally, conceptually, trying to help build a bridge between the Chinese grantees and the Ford Foundation itself. And then she goes to, now this is a picture of her at Harvard. She goes back to the United States, Kennedy School, again with support from the Ford Foundation. This time she's more sophisticated, she's more mature, her English is much better. She gets engaged with the women who are preparing for the 1995 Fourth Conference on Women that the UN holds in Beijing. So she starts writing, she's writing about civil society in China. So she's becoming a much more prominent individual person. And then she comes back and she leaves Ford. And she does a number of other things. And I know my time is running out, but among those things is she serves as a consultant to other American organizations who are seeking to understand Chinese civil society. She goes on to lead the Beijing office of the Asia Foundation. She runs the corporate social responsibility work at Microsoft and ultimately runs a small American NGO, the Institute for Sustainable Communities. I think I'll just close by saying, I think it's interesting to note that unlike the people at the end of the book who all really spent significant time in the US, Zhang Ye's time spent in the US is not exceptionally long. However, you'll see that once she joins the Ford Foundation, her entire career is spent working in American organizations and with American organizations, and she never really goes back to working for the state. And I think this is maybe something we can talk about in a Q&A. Is this like a fatal choice? Did she do it by accident? And what did that mean for her and for the work that she was trying to do? So I will stop there. I think there's one more picture. There she is. And just thank you for listening, and over to Emily, I guess.
Great. Thanks. And as we get ready to hear Emily, quick question to you, Elizabeth. When you kind of think about the development of civil society in China, do you have for instance, of lasting change to Chinese society that she was part of?
Oh, I think it's pretty significant. I like to say that Chinese civil society in China today is the largest it's ever been and the smallest at the same time. And what I mean by that is the number of NGOs that are in China, primarily Chinese NGOs that are in China is more than probably ever in modern Chinese history by the number of them. But the space they have in which to do their work is also smaller than I've ever seen. And so I think that one thing that has happened is just the idea of citizens being able to organize around issues of shared interest and do something about it. Even if that's bird watching or homeowners association or some kind of civic engagement, is not a mystery, and everyone participates in it one way or another.
Yeah.
I think we can talk about activism and advocacy-oriented civil society kinds of rights-based NGOs, et cetera, as being obviously highly restricted, almost non-existent at this point. But I think civic engagement is something that's probably a human impulse, and I think that it is pretty alive and well.
Yeah, great. And great way to transition to Emily. Over to you.
Setting my timer, so hopefully I won't go for too long. So my chapter is on Yang Meiqi, who is also someone that I know somewhat well, although I know her much better now thanks to this project than I did before. So she's primarily known in China in the modern dance community, which is still a relatively small part of the broader dance world in China, but it's a very significant one. And especially for the portion of the Chinese dance community that has really strong connections with the United States, modern dance has the strongest. And so she's the ideal person to talk about U.S. China relationship if we're thinking about dance in China. So Yang Meiqi was actually born in 1945 at the very end of World War II. So even though her family was from Shanghai, she was actually born in Chongqing, and then they went back to Shanghai as so many different families did. One of the interesting aspects of her family background is that her parents were both educated in U.S.-led missionary schools. So Yang Meiqi says that growing up, her parents often spoke English together. Their entire education was in English. And later, when she ended up collaborating with the United States, her mom actually served as a translator and interpreter because Yang Meiqi herself, despite playing a pivotal role in U.S. China relations, never learned English. And so Yang Meiqi, when she was 11 years old, tested into the Beijing Dance School, which is the first major national dance conservatory in China. And she was part of the group that majored in Chinese dance, which meant she focused on Chinese classical dance and Chinese folk dance. And when she graduated, she was, let me go back. When she graduated, she was sent to Guangdong to serve as a teacher at the Guangdong Dance School, which was one of the major dance schools in China at the time. And specifically, she was teaching folk dance. So as part of that process, she had an opportunity to conduct field research and really get to know dance as part of everyday life in China, in addition to it being part of the professional dance world. After the Cultural Revolution, she, as a dance educator, felt that there was a lot to be learned from the United States in terms of dance education, and she wanted to explore different ways of teaching dancers and possibly introduce new ideas into dance pedagogy. And this is what led her to visit the United States in the summer of 1986. So she actually also only spent a very short time in the United States, but it was very transformative. So she received an invitation from the American Dance Festival, which is a very important modern dance institution based in Durham, North Carolina, and she also received funding from the Asian Cultural Council. So she came to the US. She first spent 3 weeks in New York City, where she had a very packed schedule of watching performances and observing dance education in some of the top modern dance institutions in the United States, including Martha Graham's school, Eldon Nicolai's school, and Merce Cunningham's. And this really gave her insight into the modern dance world in the United States. She also watched a wide range of performances in New York. And then she went to Durham to participate in the American Dance Festival for 6 weeks, where she herself was taking dance classes in all of these different forms, and also seeing performances not only by American dance companies, but by dance companies invited from other parts of the world. And she was especially touched by performances from Asia that she hadn't had an opportunity to see in China. So she saw performances from Korea and the Philippines that integrated Asian cultural practices with modern dance. And she said that she shed tears in the theater after watching those performances because it inspired her to think about what was possible in China. So while she was at the American Dance Festival, she famously pitched an idea to Charles Reinhardt, who you can see here in this photo. Charles Reinhardt actually passed away just not long ago, and he played a pivotal role. They became lifelong friends. She continues to send me WeChat messages about Charles, and they have a very, very close relationship. So what happened is she pitched this idea to Charles to introduce American modern dance to China. Charles was in the process of globalizing and internationalizing American Dance Festival, so this happened at the perfect moment. He recommended her to the Asian Cultural Council, and they created this long-lasting collaboration in which they, the next year in 1987, established the first major institutionalized program in China to train Chinese dancers in modern dance in an official state-run institution. They brought in 18 dancers and choreographers from the United States from 1987 all the way until the mid-1990s. And following the graduation of this first cohort of students, they established the Guangdong Modern Dance Company, which is the first large-scale, long-standing modern dance company in China. It's still very active today. The cohort of students in this group went on to all be extremely influential, includes major figures like Shen Wei, who actually had a company based in New York and is one of the leading contemporary choreographers worldwide. Jin Xing, who's a very important media celebrity and transgender icon in China, as well as many other influential artists. This is a photograph from the graduation ceremony. You can see Yang and Charles both in the photograph. And then lastly, I think because I want to make sure we have time for conversation, a couple of highlights from the chapter. So one of the things that I try to emphasize in the chapter is that this was a very critical transformative moment when she came to the US in 1986, but it was part of a longer history of many people who had actually been engaged with modern dance and attempted to introduce modern dance to China. And there were deep relationships on both sides that sort of made this process successful. Another interesting point from the chapter that I highlight is the role of Asian Americans in this exchange, and maybe we'll have time to talk about that more in the discussion. And then also just the immense network of people that this program launched. So today, like I mentioned, I've met Yang Meiqi mainly because most modern dancers in China in some way trace their lineage to this program that she established. So it wasn't just her as an individual, it was actually this network that they created that really has ripple effects to the present day. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks to all of you. Yeah, please. So we have about 20 minutes or so just for a conversation, including your questions. So I'll pose a couple, and then how does it work, Rosie? Is there a microphone that'll go around in a little bit? So, okay, so please get your questions ready, and we'll have time for that. I want to put this question to each of you is, can you think of the most concrete example of, the person you wrote about, or you can choose whoever, changed the nature of life in China, whether it's the way people dance today, or a specific impact of civil society in China. I just wonder, this is kind of the impact question, in as concrete a way as you can, do you have an example for me?
I can try to. Oh, I will try. I don't know how concrete this is going to be. I think Zhang Ye's one thing that she was able to do, particularly when she was at the Ford Foundation, was to really help. She played a really, really critical role at a time when there weren't very many people who could do this in helping to explain China to the West and the West to China. And concretely, that would have been through the grantees that the Ford Foundation was funding, which at the time included people like Wang Qishan and others who would go on to become very important leaders and influential people in China. And that was a period where those people were reformers and were eager for ideas. The Ford Foundation had the money, but they didn't necessarily understand what it was the Chinese were really looking for. And conversely, a lot of the times the Chinese people didn't really understand what it was that the West could offer, right? And so it was very important at that time to have like some people who could understand both things and to make sure that to the best degree possible that those kind of connections were made. I think that's probably not as concrete as you were asking. But then just to follow on from that, I think the way in which civil society itself began to emerge in China, separated independent civil society was really through international partnerships initially. I mean, I did just say that there's a lot of NGOs now in China, but there weren't in the beginning. And so she plays, not alone, there's many who are involved in this and many in this book, and including dance as another category of civil society, right? A person who was able to work concretely to help Chinese organizations learn what they could, but also, I think, adapt what they could for the reality of China.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, so I think with these exchanges, I think as most of us who've been involved in such experiences know, it's often about the actual individual people who are involved and what they go on to do with that experience. So I think the most concrete impact of Yang Meiqi's trip to the US in 1986 is she created this institutionalized program that then trained this cohort of dancers. And she actually did a second program at another school after she officially retired. So there's actually 2 cohorts of dancers that she trained at 2 different institutions. And she didn't even directly train them, but she brought in these different teachers to work with them. And each of those people went on to do something very impactful. So I mentioned Shen Wei and Jin Xing. Jin Xing actually established one of the first modern dance companies in China and created a platform for a lot of the younger generation of dancers that we know today. So some of you may have seen Tao Dance Theater, for example, one of the most well-renowned contemporary dance companies from China now. So Duan Ni, who's one of the leading dancers of that company, had been in the second cohort of Yang Meiqi's students. And Tao Ye, who founded the company, they were both in Jin Xing's company together. So there's a sort of multiple generations of dancers involved in this network. Wang Mei, who many people outside China don't know, went on to then institutionalize modern dance as one of the 2 major choreography programs at Beijing Dance Academy. So there's multiple cohorts of students who've been trained in modern dance choreography by Wang Mei, to the point that people actually say, oh my God, not another Wang Mei style choreography, because it's become so dominant in the domestic dance choreographic scene. And Wang Mei was one of the students in the original cohort. So there are multiple examples like that, where each student sort of went on to have their own impact. And it really has transformed how people dance, like you eloquently phrased, but also sort of there's continue to be dancers from China coming to the American Dance Festival, for example. Dancers from China getting Asian Cultural Council grants, which is the one that Yang Meiqi got. So these networks of institutional support have continued to bring dancers from China and continued to show Americans dance from China in a way that wouldn't have happened otherwise, and to create numerous other opportunities for other dancers to have experiences like Yang Meiqi.
I think all of the characters in the book have had substantial impact within their own professions. And when we put the book together, Deborah Davis and I, we didn't realize until we had the cast of characters that 7 of the 12 are women. That was not intentional, but I keep wondering if there might be some reason behind that. Maybe these women, particularly during the reform period, were more willing to take risks. That they were more adventurous. They were more imaginative. I'm not quite sure. But in terms of concrete results, and maybe some of you would have ideas, I'm not a sociologist, but in terms of concrete results, I would have to point to Ji Chaozhu, who was the interpreter and diplomat. And had it not been for his skill and for this deep, really profound understanding of American culture and American thinking and American life, which he gained, after living in New York and then going to Harvard. I don't think he would have played as significant a role as he did during the Nixon visit to China. And he was one of the key people who ironed out the language, Chinese and English language, for the Shanghai Communique, which really set the framework for U.S. China relations thereafter.
Yeah, great. Thank you all. If you can think of, I want to ask what you learned about their impressions of the United States. So whether it's someone you wrote about or one of the others, this is a dancer who observed Broadway, right, and found it really interesting. But I'm just curious. I'm always trying to see the U.S. from the outside. Do you have and one observation about the U.S. from the outside that you find interesting?
Ji Chaoju loved hamburgers and milkshakes.
There you go.
And yet that wasn't enough to keep him in America.
Soft power. Yeah, yeah.
I think that Zhang Ye, she grew up with an image of the United States that was wholly negative. She grew up post-revolution, the Korean War, imperialist American, everything negative. And then she suddenly meets Americans, and there's a cognitive dissonance, really, because these people are not what she was educated to believe that they would be. And then when she goes to the United States, I think her time at Smith is also filled with cognitive dissonance, right? She's older than the students. She's in her 30s, maybe late 20s. She has a child. She's left that child at home. Her English is good, but not really, really good. Though in the 80s on the campus at Smith, this is like a fervent time in American feminism, and all kinds of issues around gender and sexuality, et cetera. And these were totally new concepts to her, things that never even crossed her mind. So she's encountering all these things. And I think one of the things about her that's impressive, and a lot of people who went to the United States at that time, is she kind of just took it on board and she kept pushing forward. And she didn't just pack up and go home. Some people did, but she stayed and she kept trying to understand and she kept trying to learn. And I think she would say that the U.S. is a complicated place. It's a kaleidoscope. It's filled with so many different things. I'm not sure she thinks they're all perfect or good, but I think she really appreciated, especially now, I think she really did appreciate that she had a role to play for her country in going abroad, gathering ideas and input and bringing that home. She had never was going to stay in the United States. She was always going to come home. And then how do you meld what you saw with what you live, and how do those things kind of come together? I think is something that all the people in this have sort of struggled with and tried to figure out.
All right.
Could I add one more? Hong Wong, the social media influencer, her parents, I'll just say that they were high-ranking officials. Her mother was an interpreter to Mao. Her stepfather was Chao Guanhua, the foreign minister. And so when she came to New York, initially she was in the UN mission, the Chinese mission. But then she wasn't learning enough English. She wasn't learning enough about America. So the people in charge said, we're going to put you with an American family. And that worked beautifully. She went to an American school in Manhattan, and she became fast friends with members of this family. And there are a lot of stories that go with that. But the point is that it was really in New York, in America, that she learned about the concept of family. That's something she really had not had in China. And so I found that quite wonderful and quite surprising.
Yeah. Please, Emily. Yeah. And then please be ready with your questions. Yeah.
So the research for this particular essay is actually based on a series of oral history interviews that on the very last slide, I had a slide that said planting seeds. So it's a project that was sponsored by the American Dance Festival. And so one of the most interesting aspects of this for me was I actually interviewed I forget, 16 people, I think it was, who had played different roles in the process. And they each, of course, had a different perspective on it. But I think in terms of Yang Mei-Chi specifically, the way that she chose to introduce American modern dance to China was not to introduce any one particular system of American modern dance. And that reflected what she said, what was the most meaningful to her during her 1986 trip, was she realized that each of the different choreographers she observed in New York had a different approach to modern dance. And she wanted to bring that openness to the program. And so, for example, when Wen Hui was doing the interview with me, she said, I don't think Yang Mei-Chi likes my choreography. Yeah. Because those of you who are familiar with Wen Hui, she has a much more, I would say, theatrical, avant-garde, experimental approach to her work. And she said, but what was significant was that Yang Mei-Chi invited me anyway, because she wanted to have multiple perspectives. And that openness was actually what made it so vibrant. And so I think that was a meaningful takeaway of her understanding.
Thank you. We have a question here. And then if you want to direct it to one particular person. Please.
I have a comment rather than a question. I'm Julia Chen.
Okay.
The founding president.
Pick one.
Founding president of USET. I want to add Sheshida to this conversation because Sheshida, I mentioned that I knew her. She was a physicist, but I think her impact on U.S.-China relations is the greatest is that she became the president of Fudan University in Shanghai, and she was passionate about America, about American studies. She created probably the first Center for American Studies in China at Fudan University. And she created generations of Americanists through that center. And she learned enough about America to have hired the best lobbying firm on education in America, who got her the funding from Congress to build the American Studies Center at Fudan, which was the most opulent of its time, the only building for a long time with air conditioning. And the professors at Fudan, really tried to get into the center, not because they wanted or it was interested in America, but because they were interested in the air conditioning during the summer. Mm. And she was one of the reasons why I focused, when I established U.S. China Education Trust, we decided to focus on American studies as our central theme. She was the one who told me how important that was, because she also was the one who came to Beijing. I was really at Beida, because Beida got me to China, but she got me from Beida to Shanghai. And I was grateful to her because I'm Shanghainese.
Yep. Thank you. It's a great chapter on her, page 42, by Deborah Davis and Richard Madsen. So get the book. Plugging you guys back there. It's a great chapter on ship. Questions? Over here, please.
Hello, my name is Michele. I'm an intern at the Washington International Trade Association. I'm a student at FIU studying international relations and Chinese. So thank you guys for making the time to come here. And so my question is directed to whoever would like to answer, I guess, to all of you. But you guys talked a lot about the positives, right? When we went to the United States, the important lessons, the input that they got, and then that they brought back and eventually shaped some part of Chinese society. I was curious as to what maybe some of the obstacles they faced during this process was.
Yeah, well, the book is full of big choices trade-offs, accusations of being, yeah, but go ahead, please, Emily.
So there were so one of the things I start with in the chapter is she got this invitation and some funding, but they couldn't pay for her plane ticket. And so it was kind of eye-opening for me when she talked about how we didn't even have access to foreign currency at the time. Like, just to get the money to pay for the plane ticket, she had to find relatives in Hong Kong who could help her. She didn't speak Chinese or English, as I mentioned. So the whole language barrier, to even to this day, like I often have to translate between her and the current director of ADF because that's been an ongoing barrier. And then the thing she emphasized most in the oral history interviews that we did was just the layers of bureaucratic approval in China. And I mean, as a scholar of modern China, I often think of the 80s as a golden period when, if we're thinking of U.S. China, when there was a lot of interest and eagerness to sort of bring in American knowledge into China. And so I wasn't really surprised at the barriers, but I guess the intensity that she described of just at the time, even though it was 1987, people were afraid to sort of stick their necks out and approve this project with an American modern dance festival, because modern dance was quite stigmatized throughout the Mao era. And so it was a very difficult process getting that approval in China for the program.
I would say for Zhang Ye, some of the challenges were personal and were part of the growth and the sort of arc of her story, right? She did not choose the jobs that she got when she got out of college. They were chosen for her. She didn't say this directly, but I believe her husband was also chosen for her in a way that was, she didn't have a lot of agency over that. I think the family she married into was a traditional conservative family where she was on the cusp of, she was part of and on the cusp of a lot of social change, attitudes towards women, opportunities for women having jobs, et cetera. And then I think when she goes to Smith, she really wants to stay in the US and she wants to do an advanced degree. But her child is back in China, and the quid pro quo with CAS, the Academy of Social Sciences, was you can go for a year, but you have to come back. If you don't come back, there's no job, there's no connection, there's nothing, right? And so there was a lot at stake. And so how much agency does she actually have? So in the early stages of her story, her personal agency is significantly limited by society, by the bureaucracy, by the hierarchy, and the power that system had. And so I think something that's somewhat remarkable about her story is that over decades, she finds more agency. She divorces her husband. That is unheard of in the early 1990s. It's highly stigmatizing. To this day, I think it's a difficult part of her story for her to fully embrace. So I think that, and so these are personal challenges, but they are reflective of a larger structure that against which she was pushing. She and a lot of other people were pushing. And I think that pushing collectively made some progress in the society. But those are the kinds of things that I would say she faced. I mean, I think in there's other examples in the book. Ma Tianjie, the environmental journalist, ends up, his platform, China Dialogue, gets, trolled by the internet trolls, and, maybe that has other backing behind it. I mean, I think a lot of the people in this book have had to face some kind of resistance to the thing that they wanted to do. And they persisted.
Yeah, I think for some of them, the biggest obstacle was language. Dongxing Wang, the biologist, arrives at San Francisco airport with maybe $50 inside. He has no idea how to get from there to UC Berkeley, and he eventually gets there. But his English is basically non-existent, and but he's been given a scholarship because he's so brilliant in the field of biology. And you said Yang Mei-chi also came with very little or no English, so you had to rely on others. I think the other really big obstacle, as Elizabeth was saying about Zhang Ye, is having to leave family behind. Most of these people, except for the ones who came as youngsters, with their families, and that really was just Ji Chaoju. Hong Huang was on her own. Zhang Ye left a 2-year-old behind in China with the grandparents. So, that, the psychological stress, the agony of that. And, we didn't have, internet. We didn't in those days. It wasn't, you couldn't just easily pick up one of these things and, communicate. It's much more difficult. So the isolation, especially in those earlier days, it was, I think, very, very painful. And then when they went back to China, depending on the period, depending on what's going on in terms of U.S. China relations, you're either a patriot because you did come back after all, or you're a traitor because you've been Americanized. You've been brainwashed, so-called. So, those are just some thoughts. Yeah.
Patriot Trader, I just want to tease chapter 7 on Lang Ping, the volleyball player. Her life was full of accusations of patriot or traitor. I mean, she was a spiker for the Chinese national team. I think they won in 1984 in Los Angeles after China had not sent a delegation to the Olympics for a long time. Eventually had opportunities in the United States. Are you a patriot or a traitor? And then she coached the U.S. women's national team. I think that went to Beijing in 2008.
Yes.
And so these questions plagued her whole life. Yeah. Susan Brownell, author of the chapter, great chapter. Yep. Questions? Yes, please.
My name is Wen. Sorry.
Oh.
Hello, my name is Wen Jing. I'm from China. So I spent 6 years studying in the US. So my question is, I felt pretty related to those obstacles. I wonder, drawing from all these stories, do you guys have any suggestions or advice for the current Chinese students to navigate all this, even like a political challenges?
I mean, I can think from Yang Mei-chi's story, it was really, because of the language barrier and because of the unfamiliarity with the American world, she did rely on a lot of local cultural, I guess you could call cultural translators. So she had a classmate, Jiang Qing, who was a modern dancer who had her own dance company in New York, who actually hosted her in her apartment, helped her figure out basic things. Like she says, I didn't even know how to get access to my scholarship money or how to spend it or things like that. And then there were 2 students who turned out to be Ai Weiwei and Tan Duan, were like the people assigned to her.
Yeah.
To explain, Ai Weiwei apparently took her to the art museums and explained what she was seeing, right? And then of course the Asian Cultural Council helped get all the tickets to the shows and planned her whole, most of her itinerary, right? And so she had local people who were helping her, who were making this experience so rich. It would never have been possible if she had just come on her own. So I think that might be something worth considering, is how can you find local networks of people who have more knowledge that you can share and work with.
I do think it's really different now, right? In many, many ways. One of those ways is that Chinese students and individuals who come to the US now do come on their own with maybe a lot of independence, and try to jump into society and manage to do so, but then maybe find themselves lonely or without the kind of networks that Emily is talking about. So, or fall back onto Chinese communities that are in the U.S., but nevertheless are maybe not of the U.S. And so I think trying to figure out, as Emily said, ways to to build community in the United States that is diverse, I think would be helpful. And I have to acknowledge that right now the politics is very difficult, and the people in this book faced politics as well, but politics in a time when the overarching meta narrative was of progress and engagement and closer ties, right? As opposed to now, the meta kind of framework here is the opposite of that, right? And so I do think that you and peers of yours are in a completely new world. And I think one of the things that you can sort of take away from the stories in this book is that there is a way through. All the people in this book found a way through. Your way through will be different. Your friends' ways through will be different. But I am pretty optimistic that there is a way through. And that's the same for people like me who are trying to do the opposite thing in China. And so I guess my encouragement would just be to keep trying to find your way through.
All right, so our folks will be up here. If you have individual questions, I think I'm going to ask Rosie to come for some final remarks. But for now, please join me in thanking Elizabeth, Emily, Terry.
Well, thank you so much. On behalf of USET, enormous thanks to the panel and to Scott for moderating it. And thanks to you all for coming. And the most important thanks is to the USET team that made this possible. So enormous gratitude for all of your coming. We hope you can stay and join us for a reception afterwards. We have some food in the back. Our friends from JF Books have the books for sale. And then you are welcome to come and get it signed from the authors and continue the conversation in a more informal way. So thank you so much for coming.